We are joined by Director of Analytics, Nick, for Argonaut Hockey Group, Nick Lacoste. He's also a qualitative and quantitative analyst for the Indigenous Hockey Research Network. He is a video analyst and analytics consultant for an OHL club, a secret OHL club. He is a staff writer for Blackout Dallas. He's a staff writer for Flames Nation, the busiest man in hockey. Nick Lacoste, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we are going to be talking about moving beyond the basic here now, moving beyond the rudiments of scouting, moving beyond your scouting report, moving beyond just doing this on a day-to-day basis and how to prepare a proper report and the things to look for and the more esoteric parts of scouting, the harder to communicate parts, the things that you wish you knew essentially when you started out, the bits of advice with scouting. Because scouting, even though you could be sitting behind a laptop staring at a grainy hockey TV stream of a junior A team from Saskatchewan or Nova Scotia or a Bantam club from Kenora, Ontario. I'm just making stuff up here, trying to imagine a small community. That might be a very isolating experience, but Nick, am I wrong to say at its heart, scouting is still a very much a human enterprise?
Yes, absolutely.
So, as such, there's in-person scouting etiquette. When I say that to you, Nick, well, what do you think of? What are some things that you would like to impart upon students that are just starting out with in-person scouting etiquette?
First of all, what I may say might sound stressful because you're kind of showing up to a job when you go to scout. But I like to preface that with that, first of all. But part of etiquette when you're scouting, some of the main things are, bluntly put, don't be a loser. Don't be someone who is going to embarrass yourself, your personal brand, anybody who you're associated with. Don't make a fool of yourself. For example, if you're going to chat about somebody, any hockey player related to the teams that are on the ice, if you're going to badmouth them near anybody, you better just shut your mouth, bluntly put, because there are parents there who are very invested in their kids' futures, and you could rub them the wrong way. You could anything you start with anybody is going to go poorly, and you want to basically show up at the games as a scout, as sort of like this invisible presence, but you're still there. That's first of all.
Great point. So nobody sucks. Okay, that's important here, right? I think to sort of summarize what you were saying here, nobody sucks, even if they do. Okay, no one needs to be told that. I mean, especially if we're talking to a coach or another scout, or nobody sucks. Let someone else. If someone else wants to badmouth a player in front of you, let them go for it. Maybe they're a very famous grandson, or maybe they're someone who has that kind of latitude. Don't make the mistake. You only need to get one person on the wrong side of to ruin what could be months of work here. So that's great advice. I mean, is that fair to say, like Nick, that it doesn't make a lot of sense to when you're talking about players to denigrate their play, especially if you're there scouting them. There's a good chance that they've worked hard and they're at a high level anyway. There's no point. There's no value in that kind of language. Is that fair?
And this doesn't mean that all your reports have to be bright and rosy. You can have very critical analysis in your reports of how these people play. If they're a defender who's bad defensively, this happens often. Offensive-minded defensemen might just have not much good back checking or coverage, or they can't skate backwards. Anything like that, that's allowed to be part of their profile. That's who they are as people. But you can't go around telling people these kind of things. Keep it to yourself. Keep it to your reports. Keep your folder of notes closed. Keep your laptop out of sight of other people.
That's a great piece of advice. And again, when you're making analysis like that, it's just again just good advice in terms of what I would want to read if I was on the other side of this. If I'm a coach or if I'm someone and when I see a scouting report that says this guy sucks, it's backward skating, it's like, well, you're doing yourself a disservice as a scout if that's your analysis you take away from things, right? I mean, again, great point there, Nick. You don't have to praise every player to death, but certainly if you've been asked to look for a certain player and you've been asked to look at a specific team, there's a good chance that there's something there they'd like you to see. Now, you can disagree with various pieces of analysis, but again, it does you no favors to offer scathing indictments of their play in denigrating terms like, again, avoid the word bad, sucks, things like that. Those are not helpful words in any professional context. It just doesn't do you any favors as a scout. It did essentially codes you as an unserious person. And then a lot of what Nick seems to be saying here is be a serious person. When he's saying don't be a loser, he's saying be a person worthy of respect. Is that a fair characterization?
Yep, exactly. As I said before, it's kind of like you're showing up to a job, whether or not you've been hired to do so. I strongly believe in the idea of it's not about dressing for the job you want. You're not going to wear a suit to a rink, for example. That would be a sort of a flag as like, oh, this is someone important. You want to hide in the crowd if you can. Just wear something generally nice, and keep yourself proper. But in the sense of like you're showing up to a job, treat it like you want to maximize your effort and maximize the output that you're going to get out of it. If you were going to, for example, do a game and then send that report to someone super important that might want to hire you.
Great point. So maybe don't show up to the game in a three-piece suit and top hat. Though, if you do that, you'd better have some good scouting reports. I mean, maybe that'd become your thing. All the luck in the world to you. But again, blending in, that's an important part there. It's going to be pretty clear very quickly what you're doing there. If you have a clipboard and a laptop and things like that, they're used to seeing people that are doing what you're doing. But again, yeah, not making yourself a center of attention seems like excellent advice. But Nick, let's talk about social scouting and groupthink. So social scouting and groupthink. Nick, what is social scouting?
I would like to call social scouting hearing other people's opinions and absorbing them as your own. It goes along with the idea of groupthink. If my friend has mentioned to me that this player is super good because of X, Y, and Z, and I go to the game, I may be biased to believe X, Y, and Z and see through that lens that only X, Y, and Z will be true. For example, I watched a bit of Logan Cooley and Jimmy Snuggerud in their college days, and I was very fond of Jimmy Snuggerud, but I was less fond of Logan Cooley, surprisingly. I found this to be the case until I heard from a friend that Logan Cooley skates like the wind. You could see that all the general reports that you hear about him are his skating and his skill, but I was told about his edges. And after that, I focused strictly on Logan Cooley's edges, and I became so fond of the player that I would rather have him than multiple other players who I originally had higher in previous reports. Not saying that I had Jimmy Snuggerud over Logan Cooley. They were in different tiers in my reports. But I did find that after what I heard from somebody else, that influenced my next scouting endeavors. So be careful with what you take as gospel from other people, because your opinions matter, and you should be able to promote that your opinions matter and your own ideas and be different in the sense.
Great point. And many times you see this with writing about sports in general, Nick, is that a lot of that group thing comes from a fear of being wrong, if that makes sense, right? Is that fair, Nick? I mean, you try and glom on safety in numbers, right? And you say to yourself, well, I don't want to be on the record saying that player X or player, like for instance, Nick, if you had your own website and you were saying, you know what, I'm not so sure about this Logan Cooley fella, and here's my reasons why. And Logan Cooley, I mean, if he ends up being what he looks to be right now, looks to be a fantastic NHLer, and you think to yourself, oh, rats, I am being wrong on the internet. Guess what? You're going to be wrong as a scout. Is that a fair point, Nick? I mean, you're going to be wrong. Not to say you were wrong about Logan Cooley, but I'm sure you've been wrong about players in the past, Nick. I mean, we're all of us as fans, we have opinions of our own. You're going to be wrong. I think that is a fair sort of assertion to make, right? It is not about being perfect as a scout, is it?
And it's not even about being wrong per se. It's that at the time you perceive a player based on your experience and your values for hockey players. You may have a different value regarding hockey players than other people. You may say, I want someone who actually can skate rather than someone who only has the soft skills. Or I might want someone who has better effort and better shown on the ice that he actually is trying. There are certain values that scouts might involve in the reports that say, like, I prefer this player because of these traits. And so that makes them not necessarily wrong, but it's the opinion. That's what makes scouting so special, is the idea that a human can read other humans' opinions rather than just putting everything into a spreadsheet and pressing enter.
Exactly. Great point, right? Where it's like, you're not even wrong in that sense. How could you be wrong about what you're observing in that sense? Great point. But, you could make predictions. If you're in the business of making predictions, maybe part of your entry into scouting is you want to write prospect reports for a website, or you want to have your own website about scouting and you make predictions or do things like that. It's okay to say a player is going to be good and then they don't turn out to be good. That's okay. Okay, no one's expecting perfection. Professional scouts are wrong. Whew, 50% of the time or more, I would say, right, Nick? I mean, that's fair. Some more than others, right? It's about your process, is what I'm hearing from you, Nick, right? It's about how sound is that process. So again, group think here will give you the safety in numbers. It'll give you the sense that you're with the crowd, but it'll be very, very, very tough to make a career out of being a scout if you just have all the same opinions as everybody else. Is that a fair characterization, Nick?
Yep, differentiate yourself from others to put yourself above them.
Now let's talk about scouting now in this post-COVID world that we live in, and is one of the worlds that you have had to navigate now your entire university career, Nick, and now afterwards, and creativity that is needed in this post-COVID world. What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
There are two key points that I like to bring up regarding post-COVID creativity. The first is video analysis, which is what has been brought up multiple times in our chats regarding the idea of scouting on video. I believe it is integral to learn how to scout on video and to be comfortable scouting on video as more and more teams offer their services through video, as well as more and more opportunities are available to scout on video than there are in person. Throughout COVID, it was very difficult sometimes to get into arenas, whether or not be COVID protocols, have to wear a mask and you can't go close to anybody. You can't talk to people. You can't talk to parents. You can't learn about more than just the hockey asset that is a hockey player sometimes. So I found that difficult during COVID. And now in the post-COVID world, we're learning so much about video analysis and the idea of scouting on video being prominent in even in pro organizations. So I think that's the first point, is being comfortable with the idea of scouting on video. And the second point I'd like to make regarding post-COVID creativity is the idea of social media and personal branding. I found that more and more people that are scouts that weren't using social media before to promote their brand or their scouting ideas have now flooded Twitter and other websites with their ideas, with their opinions, and this has helped grow their brands. If you are hoping for even just followers, even just the appreciation that you're doing an okay job at scouting, whether or not you're paid to do it, I think that using the social media presence post-COVID is the perfect idea. If it's an Instagram page, if it's a Twitter, if it's a website, there are easy ways to set up, especially with the tech-minded youth that we are. We're able to set up websites and sort of trump the old folks who may keep their opinions to themselves.
This is something that I think you know from dealing with me personally. I'm a huge believer in, and this comes back to something we talked about earlier on in our chats, which is to say, if you'd like to scout, just start scouting. Scout, okay? Try it. Try it at any level you'd like. But what this means is loudly, which is uncomfortable for many of us. I'm sure it's uncomfortable. I'm sure, Nick, it doesn't come naturally to you either. Self-promotion world, maybe you have no trouble with it and this isn't for you. The idea is, okay, it's who am I to say player X or Y is good or bad? Or who am I to start my own website or my own Twitter account? We got so many websites. Who am I to start my own podcast? That's not really the right way of thinking of things. And this idea like, oh, everyone has a podcast, everyone has an Instagram page, everyone has a, you can't think like that. You're in the wrong industry if you're worried about a lot of people wanting to do something. Okay. If you've got a website, if you've got a Twitter page, if you've got an Instagram account, what you have there is a living, breathing resume about your process. It's not about, again, having that record be perfect. It's about how you demonstrate to the world that you have a sound practice and a sound process. Way more than any LinkedIn page is going to do for you. Okay. You want the LinkedIn page, you're going to need the LinkedIn page, you're going to need the resume, you're going to need the personal contacts and all the networking. Yes, yes, yes. But you would be stunned at how many interactions and bonds have been created over simply just social media, the same way that Nick just mentioned here. So yeah, okay, you're a former NHLer. Maybe you've, in your mid 50s, maybe you're not as savvy with this stuff. Maybe you've got, a lot of amazing experience, but you have no way of distributing that information to anyone else unless they're standing right next to you, right? That's a huge advantage that you have if you're young and as I like to call it, digital agility, right? If you're able to be agile on the internet, that's important, right? It's not about being perfect, and certainly, you need to be agile and also hygienic on the internet. You need to make sure that your presence there is all the things that Nick was saying in terms of dressing for success. Make sure that's the case on the internet as well. Make sure your internet hygiene is good here. Okay, this is not a place to spout off various unhinged thoughts about people on the internet on your prospect page, right? Just make sure that's goes without saying. Certainly that's one P94 talk, but keep that in mind as well. In terms of this sort of post-COVID creativity, I think the next point here is also about opportunity. There's a lot more opportunity here that came with the sort of flattening of the world in terms of the scouting environment as well. So that's awesome, uplifting news. You hear a lot of like doom and gloom regarding the scouting industry. I like what Nick's brought to the table here. And lastly, how do we monetize scouting resources here in the 21st century, Nick? How do you actually make any money doing this?
The money comes from the work you've put in to build your personal brand. If I can go onto your website and I can go through an archive and I can see that you've done all this work and I'm hiring somebody, I want to look for somebody that has this history. Even though you're a young person, having the amount of profiles you've made or the amount of publications you've produced, rather than someone who says, "Oh yeah, I've got it. Let me get that for you in a week." It's the fact that you've already had this online presence that someone can go to a link or go to an Instagram or go to a Twitter page and see, yes, this guy has been doing this for some time. I can trust this guy.
It's a great point, Nick. I mean, look, when the Indigenous Hockey Research Network was looking to hire someone to do quantitative and qualitative analysis, I had no problem putting Nick's name forward because I had a whole list of things that Nick had done. Nick had a large sort of a living document that was online that demonstrated what he did. So I knew Nick personally when this point, but many of the other people that were in charge of hiring these people did not. This is sort of the idea here, is that Nick was saying that, look, if you're able to demonstrate this credibility, people are going to want to trust you. And the money and monetization of your skill set really does boil down to trust. Can we trust you to be responsible for this task, right? There are a lot of people who are quite skilled at these tasks, but again, the reason that often people refer or defer, I should say, to experience, it boils down to trust. If I've got a limited amount of financial resources that I can devote to player scouting, I'm going to defer to someone that I can trust. Now, sometimes if in the absence of, sound decision making, sometimes it's going to be someone who has NHL experience. Fair enough, right? But if you're able to barge past that, if you're able to break through that barrier by demonstrating public credibility, that's where you're able to access the sort of trust which comes with this on the sort of job side of things. Now, again, as Nick would tell you, we are not telling you that riches await you in terms of the early stages here. Is that a fair characterization, Nick, as well?
Yeah, it takes a lot of grunt work and it takes a lot of time spent without the money coming in.
Yeah.
But it's worth it in the end. It depends on what avenue you'd like to pursue. There are multiple areas of sport. There isn't just scouting or not scouting. There are plenty of different industry pieces that you can choose, and scouting doesn't have to be the only or the first or the last one. You can, if you like scouting and you want to do it as a hobby, it doesn't take a lot of time to find the idea of a schedule, whether it be video or in person. And if you enjoy it, it's something that you get to watch hockey games and it's fun. I think that's the biggest part of it, is the passion is sort of refined and it's part of what it is.
Nick, thank you so much for all of your help throughout this talk and many others. We really do appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise.
Thank you for having me.